Good morning, everybody. This is Jack McCullough. Thanks for joining this webinar. It was, of course, originally thought to be a live event, but the circumstances have made us go to webinars. So before we begin and I turn it over to our speakers, I just want to go through a few things. First of all, I want to thank the team that made this possible. We were a live events business until about a week and a half ago, and now we're doing about 5 or 6 webinars a week. So we're able to continue to provide great content like you're going to get today to the CFO community. So thanks to Katie and Brittany for jumping on this call and making this possible. Also want to thank our sponsors for standing by us during this time of crisis. Obviously, the events are unprecedented within our lifetimes. And the sponsors are really sticking by us. They're coming through, they're offering ongoing support. Anything that we need, we're getting from them. So thank you for making this event possible. Unfortunately, they can't stand and take a bow, but I want to at least acknowledge them and encourage our members to thank them. Our sponsors for the San Francisco chapter include Bank of America, Oracle NetSuite, Adaptive Insights, Effectus, KPMG, Marsh, Shares Post, Tipalti, and Vistra. So I've called on just about all of you and other sponsors across the country for help getting through the crisis, and all of you, none of you have said no. So I am forever grateful for your support. A couple of things. Today's program, it was originally going to be 90 minutes, but we're going to limit it to 1 hour. We have just found that the attention spans and distractions are long after an hour. So we're going to go an hour, which means that you can earn 1.2 CPE if you're a member of the CFO Leadership Council. We're only awarding CPE on webinars to our members. To earn the CPE, you do have to stick around till the very end of the program, and we will be asking polling questions throughout, and you do need to answer all of the polling questions as well. They're really easy questions. They're true, false, or yes or no type questions, so you can answer them pretty easily. And also, if you have any questions of the audience, you can't ask them. I'm sorry, if you have any questions of the speakers, you won't be able to ask them. So what you can do on the rectangle, which is for most of you in the right side of your screen, you can type a question in there, and we will on occasion interrupt the moderator and ask the question to him. So on the subject of the moderator, I want to introduce Rob, who is with Tipalti. They are, again, a sponsor in the CFO Leadership Council San Francisco chapter. He is the Chief Marketing Officer in charge of alliances. I've known Rob, what have we known each other? 10 or 12 years anyway, right?
Yeah, quite a long time.
Yeah, so one of my longer professional relationships. So he is a great guy. So, if you get a chance to get to know him, please do. And Rob, thanks again for keeping this on course. And I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Jack, and appreciate everyone for making the time today and joining us. So today's session is going to be on AI and automation for the finance leader. So it should be a great panel. We'll learn how finance is adopting and utilizing leading edge technology such as automation and artificial intelligence. I'll introduce myself shortly, and then I will move it over to the panelists and let them introduce themselves. Again, my name is Rob Israq. I run marketing and alliances for Tipalti. I've been there about 5 years now. Tipalti is a leading accounts payable automation solution designed for startups and mid-sized companies. Prior to Tipalti, I was VP of Global Programs at NetSuite for about 8 years. Took them public and beyond. And prior to that, I was at Intuit QuickBooks and GE Financial. So quite a lot of experience working in the finance realm and with CFOs. Without further ado, I'll introduce our esteemed panelists. Curtis Atkinson, CFO of Sojourn, will be joining us. And then Ellen Campana from KPMG was going to be joining us, but unfortunately she had a late family issue she notified us of last night. But fortunately, John Berry from KPMG, who's a director of advanced analytics and automation, was able to join us. So thanks, Curtis and John. I'd love to introduce you guys and have you introduce yourself to the panel. So if you can introduce yourself, talk about your role at your companies, and tell us a little bit about what your companies do and your practice at the company. So let's start with John.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am part of the advanced analytics and automation practice within our advisory group at KPMG. And we have a combination of folks in terms of how we work with clients in order to address the challenges and disruptions that are going on in the market today, from both everything from kind of basic business process automation all the way up to cognitive and AI, and how data analytics, things like natural language processing and machine learning can come in. And we're certainly seeing a lot of that activity in the finance function as well. I specifically work with our banking and financial services clients, and also do some work in healthcare. But excited to be here today, and it's a great topic that's certainly very timely.
Thanks, John. Curtis, could you introduce yourself to the attendees?
Yes, thank you. Curtis Atkinson, CFO of Sojourn. And I joined Sojourn about 6 years ago. The company was about 30 million in sales at the time, and we've been growing at about a 40% CAGR, so growing fast. And during that time, spent most of my work scaling the systems. Our mantra was no more spreadsheets. So we've been trying to make sure as we've grown fast that the wheels don't fall off the car, and it's been a lot of fun. We're in the travel business, which means I'm busy these days, servicing our travel advertisers and helping them through the difficulties here. Just share a little bit of tidbit. We get a lot of information from all the search activity and the other activity that consumers do about travel, and everyone's idea is for spring break is, oh, I'll just go to Florida or Hawaii. So that's just everyone else's idea. So if that's your idea, maybe something other than that would be good. But so managing through things like all CFOs are right now, but happy to be with you here and talk to you a little bit about the work we've done with RPA and process automation.
Yeah, and Curtis, prior to Sojourn, he's been CFO at multiple startups. He's also worked at the Federal Reserve Board, Chase Manhattan Bank, United Airlines. He's been general manager at Monster.com. So he's got a wealth of experience, and he has been a co-founder of Affinity Labs as well. So he's being a little humble, but figured I'd add that in. So great. So let's start with the panel. As I said, the topic today is about automation and artificial intelligence for the finance leader. Before we jump right into the questions, we have a polling question. So let's wait for that to pop up on the screen here. And you'll see the polling question pop up on your screen, and then if you guys can each answer it, it'll give us a little data on the group. So I'll read the question out. How much time have you spent formulating an automation and AI strategy for your organization? Option one, a great deal, some, or little or none. So if you folks on the phone can all please answer the question, that would be great. All right, here we have the results. So it looks like the vast majority have not formulated a strategy as of this point, about 55%. However, about 35% of the group have made some progress creating a strategy around this, about 35%, so that's great. Some good progress, and I'll kind of take it from there now into the panelists. So let's start with the first question of the day for our panelists. Can each of you guys touch on what the major components of the tech stack are for the finance team from your perspective? What tools do you advise make sense in the early days to look at from a technology perspective? And what tools are more appropriate at a later stage or as the company matures? And, think of all the different aspects that are required within business and certainly within finance and accounting. So let's start with John on this one.
Sure. Great question, and that's certainly something that we get a lot of when we're trying to help our clients kind of think through where they're at and where they need to go, and also just looking at the results of the polling. That kind of look at the percentages of where certain finance functions currently are. Again, those are very similar to the conversations that we're having. And I think as you think about the broader tech stack, it really goes from the kind of components that you've got to think about are obviously looking at data management. How are you going to be addressing things like cloud technologies? But then when you start to think about some of the key components that go into that, you're really looking at kind of at the beginning stages of applying automation and analytics are things like, business process management or robotics, so RPA. And then you're going to really, as you start to get into that, start moving up the chain where you're starting to look at, how are you able to start to address things like unstructured data, things like, certain kinds of key contractual documents or financial documents that, are in different kinds of formats. And so you start looking at machine learning, more NLP kinds of capabilities to start moving you more towards that cognitive. And then I think as you think about, even more advanced things around blockchain, those are all kind of the key elements that we help our clients kind of think through as they're thinking about, what are some of those key piece parts that they want to start to think through and pull together. But it's really typically as you get into it, you're going to start more in that area of looking at, as I was saying, kind of the RPA, the BPM kinds of things, and then learning and growing and building on from that.
Thanks, John. And for the folks on the phone who have never heard of the term RPA, it means robotics process automation. So automation technologies to streamline workflows. Curtis, could you share your insights on the tech stack for the finance team, the different technologies that make sense in the early days and then as you mature?
Yeah, that's great. I think Sojourn, where I am, is a great example as we've gone through a big growth change. When I first started, we were on QuickBooks. And very quickly, we had just expanded to Europe, and QuickBooks doesn't consolidate. So we were doing all that by hand. And eventually, we moved to NetSuite, which we've been very happy with. And we're doing what's called dual book accounting, meaning doing our books in multiple currencies and accounting frameworks. We have about 10 subsidiaries. On the FP&A side, we started in spreadsheets, then we moved to Adaptive Insights, Adaptive Planning, which is integrated into NetSuite. We've always been using Salesforce, but we've gotten more sophisticated. We now are using Celigo as a connector between Salesforce and NetSuite and pulling in all of our information, fully automating, pretty much fully automating quote to cash for us. And then for paying bills, we started with Bill.com, which worked fine at the time when we had a small number of vendors just in the US. Then we made the switch to Tipalti, which handles all of our AP payments, workflows, and it does that globally for us, and which has been fantastic for us. And then also I should mention Flowcast is another key piece, which is close automation software. We've been very happy with that. And as we've gone to multiple subsidiaries, it's when you're trying to close quickly, it's difficult to keep track of everything and have all the reconciliations been done. Has the checklist been filled out? That helps us do that and really manage a a lot of subsidiaries at scale.
Awesome. Great. Appreciate that. So let's move to next question. The CFO has a lot of roles right now, particularly at an early stage company, oftentimes beyond finance and accounting, overseeing IT, HR, legal, facilities, fundraising, and sometimes other functions like IT. From your perspectives, who owns a tech stack, finance, IT, or other, and how does that change over the course of time? And then how do you work with your other stakeholders in the business to make sure the right systems are being put in place and that you have buy-in? So let's start this one with Curtis, and then we'll move to John.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So again, at the start of Sojourn, I owned all of those, desktop IT, human resources, legal, facilities, everything soup to nuts. And as I mentioned, we had this mantra, we wanted to grow fast. And one of the things I needed to do was get everybody out of spreadsheets, and we needed to get really a really good data warehouse set up and a business intelligence function for reporting. And so I started that team, found somebody internally with the sort of background and good sense around data, and spun up a BI team as well. And then as the company has grown, how I think of it as the CFO is when the questions I'm being asked get beyond my level of expertise, that's about the time to bring in a specialist. And so now where I am today, I'm not in charge of IT, I'm not in charge of HR, I'm not in charge of legal, I still have facilities. But the nice part is having been part of that process and started a lot of these teams and hired the people, they have a really good understanding of finance, and they're my people that I hired, and we work great together, and it really helps with the coordination quite a bit. So happy, that's been a great model for us.
Great. John, how about what's your perspective on that around who owns a tech stack and how finance and IT collaborate on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Curtis's response, kind of shows some of what we see. We've done a lot of studies, have a nice white paper that we could certainly get out to the group about the future of finance. But I think as he walked through and kind of talked about that journey, the answer in some ways depends on the size and complexity of the organization that you're serving as a CFO on. But regardless of kind of that size and complexity, Curtis really kind of, showed that the CFO position and the role and responsibility is really uniquely positioned because of the permissions that they have and also their responsibility, across the organization to really combine the finance strategy, analytics, and those technology capabilities in order to drive that right analytics and automation agenda. And so it is a critical role that's uniquely positioned for that. The other thing that we see as you're really going on this journey, and I think Curtis kind of highlighted on some of that as well, is the idea of governance and those kinds of critical executive routines become really important because you really want to have that. We do believe strongly that an analytics and automation center of excellence is critical so that you're not replicating a bunch of different potential tools or platforms across your company, but also that you're really driving some of the scale that you need, because as you go down that journey, you are going to get some of those capabilities. So making sure that you've got the right stakeholders, the right kind of governance routines, a COE can really help to establish that. Center of excellence, and so that's a critical aspect as well.
Let me jump back in here. Thanks, John. That's a great point. And as each one of these functions that we owned, and then as they became their independent function, I'm thinking in particular of BI, we did exactly that. We made sure we established a formal charter for the organization, established who the stakeholders were, and work through how decisions and priorities would be made up front. And I think that helps those groups to be successful, and that's a critical, I think, part of managing growth and transition.
Great. Related to the topic of the panel today, CFOs are increasingly being charged. I'm sure it's covered in that white paper you talked about, John, as well. CFOs are increasingly being charged with scaling and optimizing not only the finance function, but the entire operation and decision making for the business, things like BI, in fact. How are you seeing finance leaders utilize technology like automation, like AI, to address the needs of their finance group as well as the business? How about we start this one with John?
Sure. I think one of the key things, again, Curtis kind of touched on that a little bit, but it is really taking advantage of some of the business intelligence, some of the new capabilities from analytics. We're seeing a significant shift now for finance function from, more of those kind of descriptive and diagnostic kinds of analytics that are more, kind of really looking in the past and trying to, to take advantage of insights from that, and shifting more towards predictive or prescriptive, so that you're really, looking at what is coming down the pike, and taking advantage of that, as well as the prescriptive aspect of what you should do about it. So that's certainly a significant shift. And then also just how you start to look at the disruptors that are out there, and really turn those into certain kinds of opportunities. And that starts to, the finance leaders that have been most successful with this are those that are really, stepping back and thinking about, what does the finance function look like today based on today's analytics, today's automation, today's capabilities. And then you really start looking at, what is the new organizational strategy that you need to have? How do you start looking, having more of a venture capitalist mindset, so to speak, where you're looking at a portfolio to enable your business? Looking at that, like we were just talking about, the kinds of strategic frameworks that are aligning your investments, as well as getting the right stakeholders together, driving those new kinds of metrics. So there's a lot that's going on, and a lot of new ways of kind of thinking about and addressing things. But those are some of the key success factors that we're seeing as we're working with our clients.
Thanks.
Hey,
Thanks.
Do you guys mind if I interrupt with a couple of audience questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Terrific. And the first one is aimed at you, Curtis.
Mhm.
Somebody's speaking for the entire group, apparently. We're very curious to know how Sojourn manages and automates their recurring billing and usage.
The recurring billing and usage. So would that be AP or AR? I'm not quite understanding that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the drawback.
I'll tell you about, I can tell you about both.
Yeah, please.
Actually, this may lead in, I have a list of well, I was maybe going to be responding to Rob's next question. And I think what is helpful is we haven't really talked about that much about what robotic process automation is. And from my perspective, it does three things for me. First, it automates processes. It just gives you automation. And instead of keying in stuff, it sucks in files, or it goes into other sources of data and connects it. So it does that. The second thing it should do, if you're getting really good RPA, is it helps automate decision making. And it does that through using artificial intelligence or machine learning, matching, fuzzy logic, lookalike stuff. So you're really just dealing with exceptions and not actually doing all the work. And then I think the third thing robotic process automation is really good with is handling things across apps. So you've got, I went through my tech stack. RPA can help bridge processes that span multiple apps. So that's my perspective of what it does. So on AP, it's interesting. I mentioned we were on Bill.com. Yeah, Bill.com helps automate things somewhat. It helps us and it routes things, but it didn't make any of the decisions for us. It didn't automate anything. It didn't match things. We all had to do that ourselves, and that's what we got when we moved to Tipalti. So Tipalti incorporates RPA into its product, and so that means that managing AP and paying all of our vendors is much easier. And even though the company is 5-6 times the size that it used to be, we have the same number of people running everything. So Kapalti is key to that, and it's because, again, a lot of times you think RPA is something you have to hire specific software to do, but the really good providers of all of the finance systems are building RPA into their systems, and so that's really is the key to our AP. On the accounts receivable side and quote to cash, we're really leveraging Salesforce, and we've built in custom workflows in the Force platform, and we then have things where our account managers go into that and they do the verification, but we've built in a lot of auto reconciliation features. So again, if things match up, it gets auto approved, or if it's off by a certain percent, then somebody has to look at it. And then that all gets piped with our Saligo connector, and then gets put in real time into NetSuite, and NetSuite then goes ahead and shoots out the invoices as soon as they're ready, and that helps with collections. Sometimes we don't wait till we're all done. That's how we used to do it, but now in real time, when we're ready to invoice, and we have about 8,000 to 10,000 invoices we send out a month, and so those all get sent out in real time by NetSuite, and I guess maybe that's my answer of how we do AP and AI.
It's pretty fascinating to hear the different workflows and ways to solve these problems.
And we use a lot of Suite, and NetSuite use a lot of what are called Suite scripting, and we're using a lot of when we generate we really just have one invoice form, but then the system customizes it with all of the inputs, and so we aren't touching that. And then with collections, we're driving automated notes in NetSuite to do reminders, and if we haven't got the payments in. So there's really quite a bit of technology there, and the kind of people that we look to hire are the kind of people that can do that kind of stuff. So we're coding and things like that. My accounting team who's in Omaha.
Yeah, finance is a very different function today. Thank you, both John, Curtis. I think now it's time for a polling question. So if we could pop that up on the screen. Polling question number 2. Okay, in the next 24 months, how much of the financial operations role will be automated through technology? Virtually all, partially, minimally, or none from your perspectives? Please go on the screen and answer that question for us. Just wait a few more moments for the results to come in. All right, looks like even a bigger majority than last time. So about 75% believe that partially some processes will be automated. So it looks like there will be a shift towards more automation. The number 2 response was minimally. I anticipate a few changes. And number 3 was virtually all at 8%. Almost no one, only 2% said that the CFO role or the finance operation role remain more or less exactly the same as it is today. So certainly it looks like a shift towards using automation and AI and other technology over the next 24 months.
That's great. And I'm wondering if whoever said that they're working remotely from a beach, if they could reach out to me. That sounds like it might be a good career opportunity for a guy like me. So, love my beach. Cool.
Thanks, Jack.
Best location
all right.
to shelter in place, that's for sure.
Yeah, certainly. Be a little less crowds. Actually, this next question actually hits on coronavirus and the economic repercussions. We anticipate with coronavirus and the economic repercussions of it, the mantra of doing more with less will quickly become more of a mandate. What role do you think technology plays in this? And what are the specific financial process and use cases that you think can benefit the most from AI and automation? And I think with an eye on finance and certainly on processes that are relevant to finance or that interrelate to the finance operation. So let's start with John on this one.
Sure, yeah, and I think that coronavirus or otherwise, I think that's certainly the mandate that is, CEOs are making more and more around doing more with less and looking at what kind of, implications there are from the current kinds of technologies that are out there. I can just kind of add on to some of the things that Curtis was talking about and maybe just, share a very specific use case of some work that we did in an area around, sales and use tax, where again, kind of looking at their current process was a lot of, typical kind of activities where an individual is having to go to multiple different systems, pull down different reports, conduct manual reviews, pull information from, spreadsheets from SharePoint sites that are in PDF format, looking at the tax software, the CDR software, whatever it might be, and then, making some of those adjustments and then, packaging it up for the preparation to send on. And, these are the kinds of typical monthly closings, quarterly closings that the finance operation has to do. And, when we kind of laid out and worked with our client, it was, 7 manual processes that were going on that would take, upwards of a couple of hundred hours to complete. And coming in and applying the robotic process automation, like Curtis was just talking about, you're really able to use the bot to go out and hit those different, receive those reports, pull the information from those reports, things like this kind of a tax, sales and use tax activity. It's very structured and it's very binary, and that's what's really good for robotic process automation, where you're always going to the same part of a report and pulling that information, and then you're consolidating it into another report, and then getting that and sending it off. Those things that are the either stare and compare manual kinds of activities, those are just ripe for transforming and really working that process with that kind of automation. And so as we work with this financial services client, 7 manual processes that took upwards of 200 hours for the finance professional, we were able to cut that basically in half. It went down to like 4 manual processes, but the total hours, were cut dramatically. So it went from a couple of hundred to more like 40. And those are the kinds of, and along with that, what you also see is that the accuracy and the quality typically improves as well, because the bot is always going to go and pull exactly the right part of the report and put it and load it the right way. And so those are the kinds of things that we see that can be very exciting and really start to drive efficiencies as well as accuracy improvement that way. And I think that's one way that you start to answer that mandate.
Thanks, John. Curtis, what's your perspective on that?
I was on mute. So again, going back to my experience here at Sojourn, 6 years ago, we were running on-premises software. And I can't imagine today dealing with this crisis with on-premises software. Like, everything being in the cloud is so helpful for us. and we have our accounting team distributed. I'm here in San Francisco with my FP&A team. All of my, well, not all, but most of my accounting team is in Omaha. I got accounting people distributed between London and also down in Singapore and in Istanbul. And again, the cloud really helps us keep going. But then when all of us have to work from home, everything's there. All of our apps are there. I don't have to call my IT department and ask them why my, Citrix server isn't working or my virtual server isn't working. Everything, just works in the cloud. So I think that's one of the most important changes that's happened, and it really helps us address some of these issues.
Yeah, I feel for the folks who haven't moved to the cloud at this point with all these work from home mandates, which actually leads us nicely to our polling question number 3. So if we could pull that question up on the screen. All right. How has work from home, which obviously many of us on the call today are dealing with, and the challenges around coronavirus, change your perspective of utilizing technology such as cloud, AI, automation? The options being it's a game changer, it's an enabler to make things smoother in this time, or it's irrelevant, it doesn't change anything. Wait a few more minutes before we see the results here. All right. Looks like a healthy majority, 59%, feel like it's an enabler, that technology certainly makes things smoother in this time. Actually, a pretty large number, 33% believe it's a game changer, that technology is made for this time. I know personally, I don't know how I'd be running the departments I'm running right now if we didn't have particularly the cloud technology that Curtis alluded to in place for sure. So that makes sense from my perspective. But it is interesting. That's probably the biggest answer of the day in terms of the most the highest magnitude towards saying that it's a must do right now. So that's interesting. Cool. So let's move to the next question. So are there, and in this case, I'm not talking about categories of technology, but are there specific new technologies, both Curtis, John, you guys are seeing out there that are particularly promising or exciting to you, that get you excited? Not categories like AI or RPA or automation, but specific applications of that technology that are interesting or promising to you. Let's start with Curtis on this one.
Sorry to be kind of boring, but it sort of feeds off the last question. But if you've seen, Zoom's stock price, it's gone up quite a bit, and you can see the need for cheap and effective video conferencing. Again, for distributed systems, we don't use Zoom. We use Google. We have an enterprise version of Google Meet or Google Hangout, and that gives you call-in numbers as well. But having that, I just think is essential, whatever kind of your organization is. I think we can talk about it an hour later, Rob, but I think at some point we should talk about the RPA software tools. I mean, I think that's something we haven't talked about yet, but I can maybe talk about that now or in a later question.
I think now's as good as any.
Okay. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about AI, machine learning, and RPA coming into the financial apps, and I've mentioned a little bit about how that Tipalti does that. Celigo, who has this connector, they have another one that helps do cash applications. So it connects with our bank account and with NetSuite. We're in the middle of implementing this, and it auto applies payments, and it uses, again, fuzzy logic, matching, and it auto applies these payments. And we have, like I said, we have 8,000 customers. It's hard to manage. We don't want to scale that linearly. So we're working on that. You see things like in Box, they have a relay product, which is again geared towards workflow automation. DocuSign bought, remember the Spring CM, I think, or something like that. It's a contract management and creation and automation. I mentioned Flowcast. So a lot of these apps are getting smarter and smarter. But one of the problems is cross apps, and sometimes there's a limit to what you can do. And that's this new industry of tools for RPA. And there are about 13 major players. From my perspective, the top players are UiPath. It's just UI, letter UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, and Work Fusion. And these tools, help you do these automations, whether it's something in email, it reads your email and does some action, or it waits for something to come in your GL, it logs in, and then it applies this logic, it routes things, it can look things up in spreadsheets and tables. It does all these kind of things that analysts on your team are doing. And I think this is a really, exciting area of the field for finance. And I think more and more, the things will go this way. According to, well, anyway, so I think that's sort of the dream is your accounting staff has a whole horde of bots at their disposal that does the work for them, and they just sort of sit back and watch the screen. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think that's the exciting promise.
Thanks. John, how about you?
Yeah, I think those are all great technology platforms from a robotic process automation standpoint. We see a lot of our clients work with them to also add in some, process orchestration types of capabilities, which would be like Appian, or some of the newer kind of less even low code like Uncork that are coming in that help to kind of move the processes along. That can be very helpful. And we also typically see clients, as they start to work through some of these automations, they quickly need to move from just the highly structured data that these tools like Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism are good at working at, and they're already starting to add some NLP capabilities to start to look at more unstructured data and how you're able to kind of pull some of those key points out and start to thread really all of those capabilities together, where you've got the RPA kind of doing those very binary kinds of processes that we talked about, and then moving the data along by linking it in with an Appian, and using different kinds of more cognitive kinds of capabilities, platforms to really look at how you're able to process and get some of those those unstructured kinds of things. A lot of the cognitive capabilities start to get built up with more internal kinds of stacks, or using some of those capabilities to pull it together. We've built a platform that we call Ignite, that's all open source code, that is able to start to really thread a lot of this together. So we're helping, for instance, with our financial services clients, is LIBOR has gone away. There are just thousands upon thousands of contracts that a lot of financial services companies have that are have the LIBOR as part of their one of the aspects of the contract in terms of how you're going to be determining what the interest rate is. And so you can use a platform like Ignite, where we'll actually ingest, and the machine can read all of those contracts and identify where the LIBOR details are, and then provide an automated way to actually, based on how the client wants to do it, to substitute and redefine that and add an addendum to those contracts. And that's really a, just a quick high level example of threading together things like RPA and cognitive and NLP together to kind of solve a business problem that would normally be done with, a cube farm full of people that are manually reading all of those contracts one by one.
Thanks, John. That's great. Great answers from both of you guys. Those, I think these specifics are helpful to the audience. So let's move to the next question.
Rob, I hate to interrupt. I just want to point out to you and the team that we're at about 9:17 your time. I apologize. So we've got about 13 minutes left. Just wanted to make you aware of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to merge a few questions, and I think we'll move into the stage where we talk about getting buy-in and implementation of these technologies to do that right, and what steps to avoid. Let's move to the next question around budgets. So of course, getting support for financial initiatives for the finance team can be challenging. Can you share each of your advice on persuading a business to invest in a new technology and building support evangelism across the organization for initiative? How do you display ROI and other benefits to the organization to mobilize them to invest in such a technology? Why don't we start with John this time?
Yes, and that is a great question, and it's always one of the key challenges that you're absolutely having to think through and work with. A lot of it comes back to looking at just in some ways good old-fashioned business cases, but that's really where you're starting to look at what are the opportunities on your cycle time reductions. What are your opportunities as you're looking at that? How do you start to potentially reduce some of the headcount? But in particular, one of the challenges as you first start down this journey is you're typically are going to be automating tasks versus entire end-to-end processes. And so your savings end up kind of piecemealing, and you're not necessarily like looking at saving an entire FTE as much as, we kind of affectionately refer to it as, potentially saving fingers and toes or arms and legs. And it becomes something that you really have to think through of not just the opportunity of driving those efficiencies, but you also have to start thinking about, the organizational aspect. And so as you're going through this, I think it comes back to something that Curtis had touched on earlier of how are you bringing together the right people? So finance clearly plays a key role, but your HR function is going to play a key role. Your risk team needs to be involved to start thinking about how you're going to manage risk. Who are the leaders that you need to have that might be managing a combination of a digital workforce as well as a human workforce? There are all sorts of different kinds of leadership skills that you need to take in place. So that center of excellence where you've got all of those different leaders and representatives of the different parts of your organization becomes really critical so that you can move forward together cohesively and on the same page as an organization.
Thank you, John. How about you, Curtis?
Yeah,
You've probably
that
been through
resonates.
this a few times.
Yeah, that resonates with me, what John said. I think the simplest way to think about an RPA project and budgeting for it is to treat it almost like you do hiring, like hiring a robot and sorry to be so to make it sound equivalent, but hiring a person, a lot of the same elements are there. You've got to think about what the costs are. You got to think about who's the owner or of this process, or who does this report to, who's managing this resource. Let me just talk about some of the costs. So I mentioned some of these tools that you can use. A single RPA license from one of these companies typically is about $15,000 to $45,000 a year for us, and this is something that a bot that can do anything you want, but it can just do one thing at a time. So, and then you're going to probably need some implementation help with that. And so let's say you double that, and that implementation help is going to program it on a couple tasks, and then you're learning how to program it, and then your team can handle that, moving forward. But yeah, in your first year, you're looking at $30,000 to $90,000 potentially, and that's sounding a lot like the cost of a real person, right? I got teams in Omaha and teams in Turkey, and that sort of spans the range. So when I was looking at these decisions, I very much looked at it like, hey, I'm hiring ahead. Now that's the other thing, is if you have budgeted heads to hire, that's a great place to get the money to do one of these projects. And then it also puts the discipline to say, hey, if I'm hiring using these RPA tools, how am I really going to get my money out of this, and how am I going to keep that RPA bot busy? And do I have enough projects? And there's a lot of different things, as John said, human resource processes, legal processes, finance processes, accounting processes, data intelligence processes. So we really, thought there was quite a bit of application for these tools, and I think you'll want to think about that as you justify the cost.
Thank you. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, John. Let's move to our final polling question of the day. If we can pull that up on the screen. And then we've got one more question, and we'll move to Q&A with the remaining time. Okay. What is the level of resistance against automation, AI, and other technology implementations within your organization today? High, moderate, low, or none? So please answer those, and we'll share the results shortly. All right, here we go. All right, low, which is great. So relatively low is the top answer, 40%. It's not a majority, but still, it's good news that generally speaking, resistance levels are relatively low at the highest count. Number 2 is moderate, so it sounds like at 39%, which is close to 40. There is a decent amount of friction there, a moderate amount. Unfortunately, 12% of you do have a high level of resistance internally in your org, and then 9% actually have none, which is great to see. So, 49% have low or none, which is, positive move, I think, positive directionally. So that's great. And then final question of the day, and then we'll move into Q&A and wrap things up. Want to make sure we stay on time. But this question is going to have a few aspects to it, but it's really about implementation of these technologies, John and Curtis. And to make sure you get the most of a technology, it's not good enough, of course, just buy it. You have to implement it and implement it well. What successes and failures have each of you seen with implementation of these types of technology we've been discussing today? And what are some of the best practices you can share? And I think related to that, if you can touch on the change management and around upskilling employees within your teams and across the organization to utilize these technologies, not be fearful of using technology to ensure optimal adoption. So a bit of a large question, but an important one. Let's start with Curtis on this one.
Yeah, answering that previous question, everybody, maybe we have an unusual company, but everybody is excited about technology, from my finance staff or in automation to our operational people. Everyone understands that automation is helpful and helps them do their job better across the board. The challenge comes in then the process of getting there, and how am I going to manage? It's really the hard part is, how do I do my day job and get the work done to do the automation and get through that process? That's the challenge. And so sometimes that comes to scheduling, and we have to pace ourselves to do some of these projects at times that are going to work. And so sometimes it means that you're, even though you'd love to automate all these things, it might mean that unless you've got the extra staff to do it, you might just do 1 or 2 projects a year. And so we go through a prioritization process and figure out what, in our certain times that we have available to do the work, what's the, going to be the best thing to do and how to do that and have the least amount of strain on the existing staff.
Great. How about you, John?
Yeah, I think that what we typically see, as you think about kind of all across all those different spectrums of what you talked about. So from a, kind of a success and failure standpoint, I think our clients that have been most successful have had a medium and longer term view in mind as they've gotten started. So, it's not unusual that you'll do some proofs of concept and, some one-off activities. But that quickly you'll start to get the hang and see that there's definitely some good successes there. And if you're not doing that with a center of excellence in mind, the reason that I've harped on that is that you'll end up with a bunch of spurious activity and it's not going to be cohesive. And, as Curtis was talking about, there are a number of different tools that are out there, and you can end up with 2 or 3 different tools that are being used in your company. So, I think having more of a thinking through a roadmap, it needs to be flexible and change as you learn, but that's definitely one thing that becomes really critical. The other aspect, I think, again, HR involvement becomes important. Change management is definitely important from a couple of different standpoints. You want your workforce to be behind this and supportive. And so there will be a lot of potential kind of feelings of threat. And so it's good to get in front of that, have a good, strong communication from your leadership, because there is the opportunity for gaining efficiencies, but there's a number of different ways that you can take that. And part of that is by reducing the volume of your hiring. And then there's the opportunity to upskill the people that you have. And so, folks that were doing very repetitive, redundant kinds of activities will now have an opportunity to shift and work, in some higher level kinds of tasks and have maybe a role that's more enriching for them. So they're just, again, kind of touching on a number of different lenses through which you need to look as you're going through this kind of a potential transformation journey.
Cool. Great. Well, appreciate your answers. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jack, to wrap things up.
Okay, actually, we're at the start gate, but how about 2 questions and we'll just, they asked, so we'll be relatively brief.
Perfect.
And this one I'll direct to John because the other one mentioned Curtis specifically. But John, any P2P software solutions that you can recommend?
Yeah, I guess off the top of my head, I don't necessarily have those that I would rattle off. Can certainly potentially, come back to you, come back here on some of those. Sorry, it's just not something I kind of have off the top of my head.
No problem. Audience unpredictability, right? So,
yeah.
Okay. And then the last one is, boy, I'm having trouble with this. Curtis, how do you identify the best timing to implement the tools that you spoke of earlier?
Yeah, it just depends every year. We're just looking what we have to accomplish. Like if we just we're adding a bunch of new subsidiaries, that's a bunch of work that takes everyone time. That's not a good time. Is it during our audit? That's not a good time. So I would generally say that during the summer is the time that we've done most of our automation work, and we're usually scrambling to get it done before we hit year end. So I would say, Q3 is sort of the spot where we're doing most of our work.
Sounds good. And actually, Rob, we just got one. It happens to be aimed at you. A little love for the moderator. So, can you speak more on how Tipalti helped improving process on top of what NS capabilities?
Sure. Tipalti is pretty deeply integrated to NetSuite. The integration points include the supplier record, the invoice record, the payment execution effort, as well as then the payment status. And then, of course, that payment and payment status sync is very important for financial close and reconciliation. And the other piece it's integrated with, NetSuite has a product called NetSuite One World, which is optimized for a multi-subsidiary organization, whether it's in, let's say, one country like the US or across the world. And Tipalti is built it also has a multi-entity architecture, and it syncs at the subsidiary ledger back to NetSuite. So the typical ROI that you'll see with that type of setup will be a 25% acceleration in the financial close, usually an 80% reduction in your accounts payable and payments workload, 66% reduction in payment error rates, and then, of course, much greater strength in financial controls across AP tax compliance, regulatory compliance, audit preparedness, and fraud.
Okay, sounds good. And I have to admit, I was a little chicken when I saw NS capabilities. I was only about 80% sure that was NetSuite. So I figured I'd let you figure that out. So thanks. Well, normally this is the time our audience would give you folks a round of applause, but I guess we'll do that virtually. But in all seriousness, thanks to all of you for being so flexible with adjusting your schedules, adapting to the 1 hour thing. John in particular, not that the others weren't great, but you were not to be on this panel until about an hour ago. So thanks for jumping on and for your keen insight. I'll look forward to some of those recommendations. I'll make sure the audience gets it. So thanks to all of you. Thanks again to Brittany and Katie for making this happen. If we were relying on me, I guarantee you this would have screwed up big time. I'm not going to read the upcoming webinar schedule. I will just say we are basically having almost a webinar a day at this point. We have 27 chapters and each is having a webinar of its own. They are free not only to members in those chapters, but all financial executives across the country. We know some of you are going to be looking for some professional development, even during a crisis, and we are going to do our best to make this available to you. So with that, we'll get you some CPE certificates out. Brittany, Katie, am I forgetting to do anything at this point, or should I bang my gavel?
I think we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks again, everyone. This was great, and we'll be in touch. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.